Random House Audio presents The Godfather Returns by Mark Winegardner. Read for you by Joe Grifasi. Spring, 1955. On a cold spring Monday afternoon in 1955, Michael Corleone summoned Nick Geraci to meet him in Brooklyn. As the new Don entered his late father's house on Long Island to make the call, two men dressed like grease monkeys watched a television puppet show, waiting for Michael's betrayer to deliver him and marveling at the tits of the corn-fed blonde puppeteer. Michael, alone, walked into the raised corner room his late father had used as an office. He sat behind the little roll-top desk that had been Tom Hagen's, the consigliere's desk. Michael would have called from home. Kay and the kids had left this morning to visit her folks in New Hampshire, except that his phone was tapped. So was the other line in this house. He kept them that way, to mislead listeners. But the inventive wiring that led to the phone in this office and the chain of bribes that protected it could have thwarted an army of cops. Michael dialed. He had no address book, just a knack for remembering numbers. The house was quiet. His mother was in Las Vegas with his sister Connie and her kids. On the second ring, Geraci's wife answered. He barely knew her but greeted her by name, Charlotte, and asked about her daughters. Michael avoided the phone in general and had never before called Geraci at home. Ordinarily, orders were buffered, 3 men deep, to ensure that nothing could be traced to the Don. Charlotte gave quavering answers to Michael's polite questions and went to get her husband. Nick Geraci had already put in a long day. 2 heroin-bearing ships, neither of which was supposed to arrive from Sicily until next week, had shown up late last night, one in New Jersey, the other in Jacksonville. A lesser man would be in prison now, but Geraci had smoothed things over by hand-delivering a cash donation to the pension fund of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, whose men in Florida had performed like champs, and by paying a visit and a sizable tribute to the Strachey family capo who controlled the docks in North Jersey. By 5, Geraci was exhausted, but home in his backyard in East Islip, playing horseshoes with his 2 girls. A 2-volume history of Roman warfare he'd just started reading sat next to the armchair in his den, in position for later that night. When the phone rang, Geraci was a few sips into his second shivers and water. He had T-bone sizzling on his barbecue pit and a Dodgers-Phillies doubleheader on the radio. Charlotte, who'd been in the kitchen assembling the rest of the meal, came out on the patio, carrying the phone with the long cord, her face drained of color. "Hello, Fausto." The only other person who called Nick Geraci by his given name was Vincent Forlenza, who stood as Geraci's godfather in Cleveland. "I'd like you to be part of this thing Tessio arranged. 7 o'clock, at this place called Two Toms. Do you know it?" "Sure," Geraci said. "I eat there all the time." It was a test. He was either supposed to ask about this thing Tessio arranged, or he wasn't. Geraci had always been good at tests. His gut feeling was to be honest. "But I have no idea what you're talking about. What thing?" "Some important people are coming from Staten Island to sort things out." Staten Island meant the Barzinis, who had that place sewn up. But if Tessio had set up peace talks with Michael and Don Barzini, why was Geraci hearing it from Michael and not Tessio? Geraci stared at the flames in his barbecue pit. Then it came to him, what must have happened. He jerked his head and silently cursed. Tessio was dead, probably among many others. The meeting place was the tip-off. Tessio loved that place, which meant that most likely he'd contacted Barzini himself and that either he or Barzini had set up a hit on Michael, which Michael had somehow anticipated. Geraci poked the T-bones with a long steel spatula. "You want me there for protection, or at the table, or what?" That was a hell of a long pause. "Sorry, I had to get some steaks off the grill here." I know what you're worried about, Fausto, but not why. Geraci sighed. Even in the best of times, I'm a worrier, so shoot me. That's why you're so good, Michael said. The worrying, it's why I like you. An hour later, Geraci arrived at Two Toms with 4 of his men and positioned them outside. He took a seat alone and sipped an espresso. He wasn't afraid. Michael Corleone, unlike his brothers, the brutish Sonny and the pathetic Fredo, had inherited the old man's deliberate nature. He wouldn't order a hit on a hunch. He'd make sure, no matter how long it took. Whatever test was coming, however galling it was to be tested by the likes of Michael Corleone, Nick Geraci would respond with honor. He was confident he'd emerge unscathed. Though he'd never heard Salvatore Tessio say a bad word about Michael, Geraci didn't doubt that Sally had thrown in with Bazzini. He had to be angry about the nepotism that made a Don out of a greenhorn like Michael. He had to see the folly of cutting the organization off from its neighborhood roots to move west and become what? Geraci had taken over countless once-thriving neighborhood businesses built by industrious, illiterate immigrant fathers and ruined by American-born sons with business degrees and dreams of expansion. Geraci checked his watch, a college graduation gift from Tessio. Michael certainly hadn't inherited the late Don's legendary punctuality. Geraci ordered a second espresso. Time and again, Geraci had proven himself a loyal member of the Corleone organization, and still shy of his 40th birthday, maybe its best earner. Once, he'd been a boxer, a heavyweight, both as Ace Geraci, a boyhood nickname that he let stick, even though it mocked him for acceding to the American pronunciation of his name, Geraci, instead of Geraci, and under numerous aliases. He was Sicilian but fair-haired, able to pass as Irish or German. He'd kept his feet for 6 rounds against a man who, a few years later, knocked the heavyweight champion of the world on his ass. But Geraci had hung around gyms since he was a little kid. He'd vowed never to become one of those punch-drunk geezers shuffling around, smelling of camphor and clutching a little bag of yesterday's donuts. He fought for money, not glory. His godfather in Cleveland, who was also, Geraci gradually learned, the godfather of Cleveland, had connected him with Tessio, who ran the biggest sports gambling operation in New York. Fixed fights meant fewer blows to the head. Soon Geraci was called on to give out back-alley beatings. The beatings punished deadbeats and loudmouths who had it coming, and earned Geraci enough money to go to college. Before he was 25, he'd finished his degree, left the enforcer racket, and was a rising man of promise in Tessio's regime. He'd started out with some dubious qualities. He was the only guy hanging out at the Patrick Henry Social Club who hadn't been born in Brooklyn or Sicily, the only one with a college degree, one of the few who didn't want to carry guns or visit whores. But the best way to get ahead was to make money for the people above him, and Geraci was such a gifted earner that soon his exotic flaws were forgotten. When Michael Corleone took advantage of his father's semi-retirement and covertly got involved with prostitution and narcotics, the businesses Vito had refused to enter, he put Geraci in charge of narcotics and let him handpick several men from Tessio's regime and what was left of Sonny's. Within months, Geraci worked some things. With the great Sicilian Don Cesare Indelicato, with the powers that be on the docks in New Jersey and Jacksonville, with the airports in New York and the Midwest. The Corleones, unbeknownst to most of the men in their organization, were making as much from narcotics as anybody in America. Without that money, they could never have amassed a war chest big enough to go after the Barzinis and the Tattaglias. Finally, just after 9 o'clock, Peter Clemenza and 3 bodyguards walked into Two Toms and sat down at Geraci's table. Geraci took it as a bad sign that Michael hadn't come, that he'd sent his capo regime instead, the one who'd over the years supervised the family's most important hits. Which sealed it. Tessio was dead. "You eat?" Clemenza asked, wheezing from the effort of the walk from his car to the table.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?